Alright, so today I want to talk about stubborn ball python males, when your male ball python will absolutely refuse to lock up with your female. As a matter of fact, it's been one of the most popular questions on some of my live streams here in the last couple of weeks. I've been doing live streams every Saturday and Sunday for about 3 hours each day. A lot of live streams. I've been hearing a lot of input from a lot of my viewers. And a lot of people ask, hey, I'm pairing up my male and my female ball python, and for whatever reason, my male's being really stubborn and it won't lock up with my female. So I actually made a list of 12 points, 12 things to consider when you're pairing up your males and your females. And the first one on my list is make sure your males are really males and not females. I've actually seen this quite a bit where people will buy a snake and they'll actually buy it as one gender or the other, not realizing that you can actually make mistakes on ball pythons. A lot of times I've actually seen a lot of people, especially with hatchlings, and they're trying to pop the hemipines. What they do is they have like hemipines in the pocket right at the base of the tail. And I've seen it at a lot of reptile shows when people are like pushing and pushing and pushing, trying to pop out the hemipines, and they absolutely cannot do it because the snake is a female instead of a male. And sometimes people can actually buy one or the other thinking, they got ripped off or something like that. And I'd say probably 99% of the time it was actually a mistake done by the breeder. As a matter of fact, when I first started in ball pythons, I actually used the probe technique where you take a metal probe and you put some water-based lubricant on it and you put it in the pockets of the hemipines. And when you're trying to probe them at a really young age, sometimes you'll actually make mistakes because the pocket won't be big enough for the probe to go all the way in. So what I like to do is I like to wait like 2 or 3 weeks before I probe all my snakes so they get a little bit of size on them, so you can get, with a probe, it's almost 100% that you know the males from the females, versus popping. I'd say popping, there's potential to actually damage the snake. As a matter of fact, my veterinarian said to never really pop a ball python, to pop out the hemipines, because you can potentially damage the snake, especially if you have a female and you don't know what you're doing and you keep trying to pop over and over and over. Really, you can actually hurt the spine on the snake right down by the tail end of the snake. So what I always do is I use the probe technique. As a matter of fact, when I first started in ball pythons, I bought a collection of females. It was like 8 or 9 females, and I put them up in my rack and I was cycling Bobby through all my females. This is Bobby, my bamboo ball python around my neck here, and he used to be a big breeder when I first started in ball pythons. And as a matter of fact, I was actually cycling him through, moving him from tub to tub to tub, and I moved him to one of those females, and a few minutes later, it sounded like the whole room was shaking. I couldn't figure out what in the world's going on. Come to find out, one of those, the females that I bought was actually a male, and I put Bobby, a male, in a tub with another male, and they were fighting in that tub, which is kind of crazy. So sometimes they'll fight and sometimes they won't, and sometimes you'll actually have, like a female you think is a male that won't fight with any of your other females because you're actually trying to pair them with your females. But if you actually have proven breeders, you really don't have to worry about it. You definitely want to make sure the gender of your ball pythons when you're pairing up. Obviously, if you have 2 males together or 2 females together, obviously you will never see a lock from that pair. Alright, so number 2, make sure your males are big enough. Make sure they're actually mature enough to breed. When I started in ball pythons, I pretty much heard that the rule of thumb was the males have to be at least 500 grams, the minimum weight of a male, to breed your females. And they'll reach about 500 grams, sometimes in less than a year, which is kind of crazy. And a lot of people say they have to be at least a year old or a minimum of 500 grams. And I found here in my collection, as a matter of fact, last year, I used several males that were a little bit over 500 grams, and I pretty much had a bust here. All the snakes that I bred those to did not lay eggs, which is pretty devastating for my season. I think I used like 2 or 3 males that were just too immature. I was trying to push them too far. So what I would actually recommend, wait for your males to develop at least 2 years. And a lot of people will say they have to be 500 grams. Some people will say 600 grams. Some people will say even 1,000 grams for your male. And to kind of be on the safe side, what I'd actually do is wait a full 2 years before you breed that male to your female. So if they're not locking up, it could be that your male's just not mature enough. All right, so number 3, this is a pretty common one. You may not see your males actually lock the females. And I saw this when I first started in ball pythons. A lot of people said, hey, you need to go through your tubs and check on them to see if your males and your females are locked up. And a lot of them, I would actually check them on a continual basis, watching to see if my males and my females were copulating. And a lot of the ones that I'd never seen copulate after cycling my males through the females for a few months, and I saw them no copulation at all, the females would end up laying eggs. And sometimes they'll lock up for just like an hour, maybe a couple hours, and then separate, and that's it. And they're actually bred, but you don't catch the copulation. Sometimes they're actually mating and you don't actually see it. So that's another thing to keep in mind. All right, so number 4, you want to be really careful when checking for a lock, because you may actually break the lock. And that's what I found when I first started in ball pythons. I was going through all my tubs. You know, everyone said, yeah, you have to, go through all your snakes. Some people say, all right, I'm going to go through all my snakes like 2 times a day, 3 times a day. Some people actually do 4 times a day, and they'll check on all the ball pythons and look for the locks. And what I actually found is sometimes I would open the tub, I'd open it really slowly and carefully, and sometimes it would actually startle the ball pythons, and they were in a lock, and when I opened the tub, it broke the lock, and that's the last thing you want. And I got to the point where I was like breaking lock after lock after lock on my ball pythons, and I decided, all right, I'm not gonna look for locks anymore, because I feel like I'm doing more damage than I'm doing good checking on the locks to seeing if they're actually copulating. And a lot of times you'll actually have the tails underneath the whole ball of the male and the female kind of wrapped together, and sometimes you're kind of looking, sometimes you even are tempted to kind of pick them up a little to see if there's a lock. And let me tell you, you can definitely break a lock if you're doing that, so you have to really be careful checking on your males and your females. All right, so number 5, you want to make sure your male is healthy. So I was actually pairing up my reticulated pythons, pretty much the only snake that I've had in my collection that had a health problem, and the female had a respiratory infection and a kind of a swollen mouth, and I actually tried to pair up the male and the female at that time, and it seemed like the male was responsive, but the female, since she wasn't feeling very good, let me tell you, she did not want to breed. If you have any kind of a health issue with your snakes, if you have mites or respiratory infection, that could be the cause of your snakes not locking up too. So if you have any kind of a problem with your snakes, you could try to pair them up in that case, especially if you have like a veterinarian trying to help you through the issue. But I'd say in most cases, if your male is sick, he probably won't lock up with the female. All right, so number 6, I've pretty much heard this across the board. I haven't really experienced it too much here in my collection, but a lot of people will say the bigger the male, the more stubborn he will actually be as far as breeding your female ball pythons. So if you actually take a look at the snake around my neck, this is Bobby, my bamboo ball python, and he is really huge. He's like 2,800 grams. He may weigh a little bit more than that. I haven't weighed him for a while. He may be about 3,000 grams. Which, let me tell you, for a male is really big. And a lot of breeders will say if you're trying to pair up a ball python male that's as big as Bobby here, they can be incredibly stubborn as far as trying to breed the females. And a lot of people will actually kind of limit feed their males and try to keep them anywhere from like 1,000 grams to about 1,500 grams, about half the size of Bobby, which is kind of crazy. They say they breed a little better at a smaller size, so you have to keep that in mind too. All right, so say for example, you have like a big male or a really stubborn male. There's a few things you can do to increase the probability of the snakes actually copulating. And number 7 here on my list, one of the things that I've done pretty much every single year is to sprinkle water on the male and the female when you first pair them up. I found that's a really neat trick to stimulate breeding. And essentially what it is a lot of times when you put the male with the female, sometimes the female can be like in a feeding mode, or maybe it's like maybe it's scared a little bit, like in an aggressive mode when you first put the male in, and they're like in different modes. You never know what the mode, kind of what the mood of the ball python is. And it seems like if you actually take the male, put it on top of the female, and then you take some lukewarm water. I found I actually use it like in one of those watering cans, like a little sprinkler water can that you'd water your houseplants with, and I sprinkle it right on top of the snakes. It seems like both snakes kind of switch moods moods, and I don't know what it is, but they seem like they kind of go into a breeding mood. It kind of snaps them out of whatever mood they're in, which is kind of interesting. Kind of gets them both in the same state of mind when you're putting them together. That seems to work here in my collection. All right, so number 8, I've actually seen a lot of people do this, and what people will actually do is they'll wait for a storm, like a stormy night where it'll be snowing, or if you get a lot of rain or something like that, they'll wait for the storm to roll in before they'll pair up their males and their females. And I usually go by like a set defined schedule. I don't really look at this, but a lot of people will say that if a storm rolls in, the barometric pressure goes down, and the barometric pressure for ball pythons can actually stimulate the breeding process. And some people will say that their snakes were more likely to copulate in the middle of a storm, which I thought was pretty interesting. You could probably put like a barometric pressure indicator on your wall, and every time it goes down, you could pair up your males and your females. As a matter of fact, you can actually download an app on your phone to monitor the barometric pressure in real time, which could be a useful trick when you're breeding ball pythons. All right, so number 9, you can actually drop the temperatures. You can drop the temperature of the hot spot, or you could drop the temperature of the ambient room temperature. And a lot of people say that will actually stimulate the breeding of your males and your females. And as a matter of fact, if you actually look at some of the thermostats on these racks and these heating sources for a lot of the racks and the tubs and everything, the thermostats will have a built-in temperature drop at night. So you can dial them in during the breeding part of the season to where you get a temperature drop during the night where it drops down a little bit, which would actually stimulate the breeding process, which I thought was pretty interesting. And here in my collection, I don't adjust any temperatures at all. I pretty much keep an ambient temperature in my room, like high 70s to low 80s, and then a hot spot of 90 degrees in my tub. And I don't change the temperatures at all through the year. All right, so number 10, I've seen a lot of people do this. They put a freshly shed skin from another male in with the pair that they're trying to pair. So they'll take the male that's really stubborn, they'll put it in with the female, and then what they'll do is they'll take a shed. A lot of times it'll work better with a fresh shed from another male, then they'll put it in there with that stubborn male and the female. And a lot of times that really stubborn male will smell all the pheromones and everything on that fresh shed from the other male, and it seems like that will actually stimulate them and get them to copulate. As a matter of fact, I've heard some people, what they'll do is they'll take another shed from a different female and put it in there too. So you could probably put like a whole bunch of different sheds in with that snake that's really stubborn to see if that will stimulate them and get them to breed. All right, so number 11, here's another thing you can try. You can put another male in with the stubborn male. I've seen some people do this. So for example, if you're trying to breed Bobby and he just absolutely will not lock with the female that you want him to lock with, I've seen some people, well, they'll take like Bobby here and then put in another male in another tub. If you leave them together too long, they can start fighting and potentially they could hurt each other. So I've seen a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll put them together for just a few minutes and they'll kind of watch them until they kind of start going at it a little bit. And for whatever reason, you know, you put two males together until they almost are at the point where they're fighting. Then you take out the stubborn male and put it in with the female. I've seen that too. That can actually work to kind of stimulate your stubborn male. I've seen some people, well, they'll put the stubborn male with the female and then they'll take another male and put it in with the pair. And I would say that could be kind of risky because if you have two males in with a female, I mean, if you turn your back for just a second, the other male could potentially lock up with your female. And then you could, you know, have some breeding that you potentially don't want between a different male breeding with your female, so you'd have to really keep a close eye on it, but I've actually seen people do that too. All right, so number 12, and the question number 12, a lot of people don't even think about this, and that is your female actually ready to breed? Maybe it's the female that's the problem where they're not locking up instead of the male. And I've seen this with my reticulated pythons too. It's a little bit easier to see with big snakes because it's like bigger and right in front of your face instead of ball pythons. And I actually took my smaller reticulated python, Sonny, he's about 45 pounds, and I put them in the enclosure with Lucy. She's about almost 100 pounds now. She's a really big snake, which is kind of crazy. And it was kind of funny watching them. As a matter of fact, I think it was about 8 months ago when I saw this. I paired them up, and I saw Sonny, the male, trying to breed with the female. He's just like going like crazy, trying to like copulate all over the place. And the female, Lucy, would have nothing to do with that male. She just absolutely refused to copulate. And if it's your female, there's a couple reasons maybe why she's not ready. It could be that she's going into a shed. Sometimes they won't be really interested in breeding when they're going into a shed. Sometimes it could be because your female is sick. If there's something wrong with your female, and in this case she actually had kind of a respiratory infection, kind of the tail end of what I was trying to. Luckily she's completely cured of the respiratory infection, so there's that too. And then the other thing is that sometimes if you don't feed your females enough, sometimes that can affect the breeding between the males and the females. And a lot of people say to really get the females to stimulate the breeding, a lot of times you'll increase the frequency of the food. So if you feed them more frequently, feed them a lot of food, and kind of double up on your food, instead of feeding your females once a week, you can feed them twice a week, and then put the male in after you've been feeding twice a week for a couple weeks or 2 or 3 weeks in a row. That usually stimulates the female to be really receptive to copulation. So these are just a few things to keep in mind. Sometimes you just, let me tell you, sometimes you just won't see the copulation, and kind of like me, you just kind of throw in the male with the female. You don't want to risk breaking the copulation, but I've seen a lot of people get really concerned when they're actually breeding them together and you don't actually see the males and the female. Another thing you can actually try, I've seen some people where their livelihoods depend on those females to breed. So what they'll do is they'll take a stubborn male and keep breeding it to the female over and over and over. And then at the end of the year, what a lot of people will do is they'll use another male and then kind of switch it up, maybe use another male and kind of cycle several males in there, kind of as a cleanup male right at the end, so you're guaranteed that you'll get at least something from that female instead of no eggs at all at the end of the season. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.